Hello, my audiophile friend. My name is Pedro Diaz, and I want to welcome you to this experimental channel, which is an offshoot of my main channel, the Audiófilos y Locos in Spanish. So please visit that other channel and subscribe. There's other interviews there in English that I haven't had the time to pass to here. But today I'm going to share with you an incredible interview that I was able to do with Keith Herron of the well-known but small company Heron Audio. And he liked to keep it small because everything is handcrafted and really well made, meticulously fabricated and assembled in his home with his wife Joan. So while I was in St. Louis making a recording with Leonard Slatkin on one of his pieces that we recorded in video, I was able to visit him, and he graciously welcomed me in his home. Thank you so much, Keith, for letting me see all the good stuff. You're going to hear some interesting artifacts too, because it just so happened that while I was there, I brought with me a huge thunderstorm. And you will hear that it was recorded binaurally. And I hope that you enjoy it. He has a lot to say, especially about subjective versus measurements, which is always something that fascinates me because I live in a completely subjective world. I'm not a measurements guy, and neither do I claim to be, or I'm not even capable of it. So I hope that you enjoy this. After all, the hobby is all about enjoying music, and thank you for watching. Oh, hello, Keith. Keith Herron. What a pleasure.
Hi, Pedro. My pleasure to have you come visit.
Thank you for your time. Tell me about this synthesizer.
Well, it's a Moog Subsequent 37. Just got it a couple of months ago and been starting to play with it. Makes a lot of interesting different sounds.
Yeah, that's all the good music started.
You bet, you bet. So,
and this is the workshop of Heron Audio, huh?
yeah, this is part of it. We do circuit board assembly here. Parts go on the boards. Final assembly here. This unit is in for update. It's
a beauty.
BTSP 360.
Oh my!
We're giving it the reference upgrade.
Nice.
And it uses 4 6922 tubes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very clean sounding.
Mm-hmm.
Still has that tube magic though. That's what I like to do.
Yeah.
I like natural sound.
That's what makes you do tube equipment.
There's a certain kind of magic to tubes, and you can get it with solid state too if you really know what you're doing.
Right.
But it's trickier. There's a lot of things to know about getting solid state to perform that way.
Mm-hmm.
But and I've been working at this stuff for a number of years. I've been an audiophile since I was 4.
Wow, that's kind of early because
I hung around the record player and loved it.
4.
Yeah, I know that because we moved when I was 4
precocious.
and a half, and I remember the record player. It was a Zenith radio and an RCA 45 RPM little changer.
Uh-huh.
And I was always looking behind the speaker trying to figure out where the people were because all the music was coming
That's
out.
right.
And I just loved all of that. And when we moved, my brother built an RK amp.
Mm.
It was a 30-watt EL34 amp. With a 15-inch Quam speaker. And
My favorite tubes, EL34s.
oh yeah, and I'd go back and forth between the Zenith radio when I was like 2nd or 3rd grade and my brother's rig, and I'm going, that sounds better, And so from that point on, I was hooked. And a number of people in my family played piano, trombone, baritone horn.
And you're a musician yourself?
I play piano and drums. Haven't done anything professional, certainly not in years, but I'm trying to get back into it now with getting a little extra time. I'm going into semi-retirement here. We're slowing things down.
You keep saying that, huh?
So,
but people won't let you.
Well, we've been selling a lot of stuff, and I really enjoy talking to the people.
Yeah.
Helping them get the kind of sound that they want. Going through their systems with them, impedance matching, all that kind of stuff that goes with it. And it's fun, and the feedback from people has been great.
Mm.
It gives me a good feeling. So
Great.
that's
So
what I like to do. And I love the electronics. I'm into physics and math. And so, you know, all these weird things that go in audio that make the sound what it is. It's not obvious by looking at things or just designing circuits. You can design a really clean circuit that sounds like crap. You know? It's figuring out what it is that's going on with resonances, what a thing I call dielectric resonance, that goes on in everything that's a dielectric, whether it's material that's the insulation of a resistor or a capacitor, or the circuit board, or even things about the chassis, where there's energy stored in the dielectric, and that dielectric resonates and it comes back out as a character in the sound. And we all know that from audio with different cables and things, how that affects the sound, fuses, all that stuff. So there's so much that goes on. What we do here, I design the circuit boards on computer. I send them out. There's a couple of companies in Chicago that make the boards for us.
And I understand your wife?
She does the assembly. Each page.
She assembles the boards.
For instance, these two capacitors go on this page. And each page has a different part and specific directions. You know, watch direction here. In fact, the where the part goes on. Her soldering is fabulous.
That's important.
We don't have any issues with it.
And she's got plenty of practice.
She doesn't make bridges, and this stuff works. Mother Nature's going at it out there.
We got some real electronics out there, electricity.
Great bass.
Yeah.
Hopefully the power stays on here.
Yeah.
So she goes through the book and puts all these parts on. We have parts all over the place. And believe it or not, I raised a family here, but you know, we wouldn't have room to do that now.
Yeah, that's right.
I do final assembly, and then come on back. I do the testing back here. This is back in the dungeon.
It's good. You can do some measurements while you do your laundry too.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Here's where I do the measuring. I use a computer. We can look at 135 decibels down. The noise you see here is from the generator. You see some spikes here, every multiple of 1 kilohertz. This is putting out 1 kilohertz sine, but because there's a square wave generator in the generator, there's a little bit of that leaking out. So you see, I've got other generators that don't do that, but there went the power. Well, it came back on. How about that? So anyway, the testing gets done here. I have a lot of fun with doing this kind of stuff. It's and I'm very specific. When I'll cover up the name here of the owner, but this is a line stage test. I go through and I look at everything that you see the check marks for.
I was standing by the window when I was waiting.
Yeah. This is Joan.
Hello, Joan.
Hello.
We're
my wife.
Just doing a little quick walkthrough.
We've been married for 44 years.
Yes.
Oh wow! Congratulations.
Known each other for close to 50.
Yeah,
49.
it's coming up. Yeah, so.
And you are the master builder of the boards.
Oh, well.
Yeah, she does. She does great work. She does sewing. She's very good at fine, intricate work, and she got right into the soldering. She knows the difference between a cold solder joint and a solder joint.
When I met him, and I was, what, 22 and you were 25, and he had all this stereo stuff in his apartment.
Yeah.
So I knew this would be our life, but it's not.
And you liked it, huh? You also an audiophile, huh?
I do.
Joan, do you take Keith in the stereo?
That's right.
So you have the final word about something, if it sounds good or not? Who has the final word? In my house, my wife tells me if it sounds good or not.
You know, years ago she'd come down and say, "That sounds great," and I'd go, "No, it doesn't."
I learned to just go.
Oh.
Well, there goes the power.
We're talking about looking at a resistor or looking at a musical instrument or a phonopreamp. These are inanimate objects. So there's no way for us to know what they sound like until you hear them. And so here we go into the field of quantum physics. Because
You know-
as an engineer and a musician, you have this confluence where you think, okay, I have to design it so it has the least amount of distortion, so it measures well, but what does it sound like?
Yeah.
How
Well,
do you
there was
reconcile those
this
two?
odd thing that brings in the dielectric resonance is there's a place in St. Louis that's now defunct, Gateway Electronics, and what they did was they sold plus electronics parts. And so I go down there on the weekends and fill my basket up with all kinds of capacitors and things, and I'd make preamps and things with either op amps or tubes, and I'd listen to all these different capacitors. And I wasn't even into resistors back then because I didn't think resistors were going to sound different. This was close to 40 years ago. And but I got to the point where I was picking up the capacitors and, making, hitting them and whatever, and I'm going, there's a resonance there that I think I hear in the music. And
Wow.
I got so good at it that I'm either really fooling myself or I can predict to a certain extent, and then I've found that out to be with resistors. I can hear metal oxide resistors in an audio circuit because they have a characteristic sound to them that I don't like.
Yeah.
But, it's like making a stew with all kinds of spices where you're supposed to have no taste when you're done. And
Exactly, right?
right, and
So you add your own spices to your sound in your equipment.
yeah, well,
The signature.
they're anti-spices. They're supposed to, like antimatter. They're supposed to cancel out this one spice that's sticking out. You need to do something to
Okay.
neutralize it.
So you go for neutrality and
Yeah, because that's where the real fun is. That's when things start to sound real.
I see.
And the speaker cones are the worst. You can tap your fingernail on the speaker cone and you can hear how it's going to resonate.
Of
And
course.
so you try to design a crossover where that characteristic, if you measure what frequency that is, and it's a range of frequencies, you try not to use it where it resonates the most. And so the same trick seemed to work with capacitors, hitting on them with my fingernail. And I found resistors are doing the same thing. And so that becomes a problem. You got a circuit board. And there was always this discussion, which is real, point-to-point wiring seems to sound better. But I'm using circuit boards, and we found that, and they're in their instructions, certain resistors are going to stand up off the board. So they're allowed to not resonate with the board.
Oh.
And so all these tricky things make a difference. And I'm telling everybody else how to do stuff now, and that's fine. I'm retiring. I've got a lot I could unload on everybody that might be
Yeah, your
helpful.
secrets.
Some people are going to disagree with all of this, and
Of course.
that's always the case with audio. And I've done all of this from my own perspective, and I've been reasonably successful. The feedback has been quite good. I'm not much for bragging about myself, so this is where I've run out of words here. But it's just something I've always enjoyed. It was a motivation where I'd wake up in the middle of the night with an idea, and it would either work or it wouldn't. But
Mhm.
in some cases it did, and so that helped me do what I do. It's I don't spend a lot of time thinking about politics and stuff going on in the rest of the world. If we all listened to music, there wouldn't be all these problems in the world.
That's right.
I see you got some music going there,
I'm
Joan.
trying to.
So I don't know what else to say. I could talk, I guess, on and on, but
I can ask you some questions.
sure.
Like, I'm sure you guys have gone to hear the St. Louis Symphony
Oh yeah.
on
Yeah.
time to time. And what would you say to audiophiles who never leave the cave, who are, crazy about the equipment and they're obsessed with the equipment? What would you say to them? Why should they go hear live music.
Well, a dose of reality is always a good thing. And, you know, I've been to Powell Hall many times over the years, and my favorite place is at the back of the balcony, 6 rows from the back. And, you know, a lot of people ask me, well, why would you like it there? You don't get the sound stage and whatever, but there's just some magic the way the sound is back there. And, I mean, you can hear that triangle and the timpani, the mallets on the heads, and all the fine detail back there, and the sound is so full and nice. And shoot, last time I was there, they had 8 basses, and it's just a nice, rich sound, and it's rich because, you know, it should be. I don't intentionally make rich sound in audio equipment because some things aren't supposed to sound rich.
It should come from the master, eh?
Yeah. It should sound like it really is. Otherwise, if you make everything sound the same, guess what? You're going to get bored, and you're going to sell that audio equipment and go buy something else. And, you know, it's fine if it sounds lush and if the first 6 records are sexy sounding and you really get into it.
Yeah.
By the time you get to a couple dozen records, you go, well, gee, everything sounds the same. You know, and these weren't all recorded in the same place, and this isn't all the same orchestras or bands or rock bands or jazz. You know, I like quite a range of things, but I don't want to hear that same kind of sound every time, unless it was supposed to be there.
And that's an interesting phenomenon, the fatigue of the equipment fatigue, because you can measure a lot of things.
Yeah.
You can measure the equipment's, you know, with an oscilloscope, the frequency response and all those plots and the distortion. But after you listen to your preamp for 6 months, or you DAC or your speakers, and suddenly you decide, I don't like this sound anymore. How do you measure that?
Well, I think you just said it. You either get bored and you find a new hobby, or you buy new equipment, and it.
So maybe you're just hearing coloration.
Yeah,
You're
that's.
getting tired of the coloration.
You get tired of that coloration. So if you can build something that doesn't have coloration, then every recording becomes something different, and then you're not stuck with that repetitive, always the same kind of sound kind of thing. And so, I like to hear the different sounds of the different venues. We played a recording of a church here with a 3-second decay time, and if we listened to enough of those recordings, you could tell the place was made out of concrete, and there's a little dryness to the sound because that's the way it sounds when we go down there. And so you want that, you know, to be true fidelity is I guess the word to use for it. And different places are going to have different kinds of sounds depending on the concert halls and how they're made and the number of people in there and everything else. So.
And when you sit back there in Powell Hall, you realize that the sound of the orchestra is really not very much like the sound of a recorded orchestra, because you're not listening through tweeters. You know, it's a very velvety sound, plus the distance of the orchestra. You know, there's a lot of air in between you and the orchestra.
Good point. You know, the mics are hanging over the stage. They're going to pick up those violins and the sweet highs, and they're going to be strong, and the brass. And when you're out there in the audience, you're a ways from that, and those highs get filtered off. I had a friend say, well, you know, this particular setup, it wasn't something that I had done, but he says, well, that's too bright. And I said, well, how do you know? Well, I used to go to this, it was a concert hall up in Boston Pops. What's the venue? Sorry, I can't think of it right now. But
Me neither.
yeah, he said, well, you sat out in the audience. You weren't where the microphones were. It's not going to sound like where you sat.
That's right.
It's these recordings, and then, of course, there's people doing mastering. And, you know, some of them have little stereo setups, or they're using headphones in some cases. I've seen a few cases of that, and they're trying to make it sound good on their setup, but that may not be what you get. There's a range of sounds off CDs. I played you a few things downstairs where some things were kind of bright and some were bass heavy, and it's all about how it was mastered and mic'd. And well, there's so much to know, and it's so tricky where mics are located and all of that. But even what the conductor hears on stage is not ever going to be quite like what it sounds like on the recording. Mercury Living Presence did a great job with that, with those microphones they used, the Sheps, and those were special made. They had a little bit of a presence peak, which is what Robert Fine liked, and Harry Pearson liked that too. I listened with him a few times, and so do I. I don't like a dull sound. I like a nice crisp sound if it's supposed to be.
Also, maybe you have to do that to compensate for the fact that you're listening to an audio system. There has to be something there to distract you a little more.
Well, it might be, but it's
add some realism.
What you enjoy listening to, yeah. Tone controls can be a problem because they do phase shifts. I've experimented with some other ways of bringing the highs.
Popular these days.
Yeah, there's some ways of doing some of that works better. I'm not going to go into all that detail right now, but what you want to do is get the kind of sound you like and you enjoy, and that's the ultimate goal. We're all a little different, but in a way, if we've been around, we know what things should sound like, and I have my own opinion, and fortunately, a lot of people agree with me, so it's worked out well. And I don't know what else to say on the subject. Ask me a few more questions.
Okay. Well, when you're sitting at the very back of Power Hall, for example, do you not get the feeling that you're actually, because you're so far away from the orchestra, that we're actually listening in mono?
You're right. You're right.
So you get that feeling of the space, and of course you hear with left and right, but it's almost like when you're far away, it's just one source, as if it was a mono.
It's kind of interesting, and I haven't analyzed it. Certainly you're getting a lot of reflections from the hall. You don't have much coming from behind you except the back wall, which is pretty close when you're up there. So it's hard to say. It was just enjoyable is the word I would use, and I'm always looking for enjoyable sound, so.
I'm trying to get you there because I'm a big fan of mono.
Yeah, well, I am too.
And so I feel like this may be the future. I mean, after all, if people are clamoring for cassettes to be back, maybe the next thing should be mono. There are thousands of millions of records out there in Goodwill stores that want to be rescued, great performances, great musicians, and we have the mono cartridges, but I wish more manufacturers would think about making a mono phono stage, for example.
Yeah.
With the right curves, with all the different non-standard curves. What would you think about that?
Well, I have a mono switch on the line stage. The problem you can get into is when you've got two channels feeding to mono, if the cartridge isn't aligned precisely right, you can get some additions and cancellations that sound a little phasey. I don't run into that much. With our phono stage, we made sure both channels had the exact same response. Well, and I measured that, and I could see them both on the screen at the same time, so I knew that they had to be accurate. And I had ways to tweak the units, which I tell the customers not to do because I've done that for them. Yeah. And the pots I use, after 25 years, they're still right on.
You could also just use one channel, but my question is, would anybody consider making a mono phono stage that would include, you know, the Deca curves, the
Yeah.
ASBU.
I've
you
looked
know,
at all of
the
that.
London curves.
I've got all of those curves. I've calculated what I would need to do. I think, you know, you've got to be one who has appreciation for that era back before RIAA became standard. And most of the records out there play fairly well with RIAA. Now, there's some that aren't, you know, so I'm not making a blanket statement there. But I've studied all those curves, and you know, I think you could just use one channel of one of our phonostages and get good mono just doing it that way. So, you know, I showed you a box set down there. It's Eugene Normandy Philadelphia Orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not giving an exact number here. I'm taking a guess, but I'm going to say 2/3 of the recordings in that set were mono.
The Toscanini also that you have.
Yeah.
Toscanini.
Oh, yeah. Those are 90% or 100% mono, and so yeah, and they sound great and they're fun. No question about it. And even on a stereo system, I get that nice central image, and
Right.
you just sit back and close your eyes, and boy, it's just fun.
I have a dedicated mono system in which I only use one speaker. I have a Klipsch La Scala speaker, and I have it in one corner, and it gives me the freedom that I can sit wherever I want, and it does fill the room just as well.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
the great thing about having a horn speaker that's mono is that you get that presence, you know, the violin and the voices, they
Oh,
just
yeah.
jump out. You're not gonna get maybe the quality of sound that you get with your hi-fi speakers, but the presence is something.
Yeah, I
unique.
love presence is everything for me. I want to close my eyes and feel like I go out and touch the performers,
Palpable.
and I get that a lot now. I wish everybody could, but I've gone kind of nuts with even the speaker cones, treating them and doing things to try to
Mm-hmm.
tame resonances and things to get them to sound more natural, and not everybody can do that. So that's, but it's what I like to do. So
Maybe this will be a good retirement project. Make a mono phono preamp with
Well,
different
maybe.
curves
maybe so, maybe so.
and a mono amp.
I've got
a 300B amp.
I've got calculations down there. I did the RIAA curve to like 8 decimal places using the time constants in an Excel spreadsheet, which is quite extensive to do that. But I could plug in different time constants into that for the different curves, and I could get much more precise numbers than would ever have been recorded, because, you know, especially the older recordings, they were using parts that, you know, capacitors and resistors in their filter networks that probably weren't nearly as accurate as you could get today. But even today, you don't get that kind of accuracy. And then other things affect the response too, of course. Even platter mats change that color of the sound.
Yes,
And,
so now we're
and-
getting in the subjective now, from the engineer's point of view, the subjective. So
Well, yeah, and it is subjective, but it's when you change a platter mat and you change the color of the sound, you know that the vinyl is resonating, and so is the mat, and things underneath it too. The platter itself. And
some things cannot be measured then.
well, just like what's a capacitor going to sound like? You know, well,
Right. Or
uh,
a soprano.
so-
you can have two sopranos sing the same range,
yeah,
and you can measure the frequency, but they sound different.
yeah.
So how do you measure that? Timbre.
Well, you know,
That's why
I can't
we
answer
say-
that one. I can answer the capacitor one because I've
Right.
gotten kind of where I can, you know, test their physical properties and how they resonate. Same thing happens with a platter mat and a felt mat versus a rubber mat. You used to see rubber mats a lot and I've kind of gone back to the rubber because you get some good things happening, but they're not all the same. I've got like 15 different rubber mats down there, and there's only one I like. I'm not going to tell you whose right now, but it's.
Okay, well, you know, I ask you this question because audiophiles these days, they tend to go online on YouTube or look at measurements, and they feel like, well, if it measures well, it's going to sound great, so I'm going to buy this because it measures well.
Measurements are only worth so much. They tell you if it's going to sound really bad, because if it measures poorly,
Well, what about tubes? Tubes don't measure as well as some hifi product that has the latest equipment.
some tubes, and somebody's going to be mad out there when I say this, but some tubes will have less distortion than transistors, and that shocks people when you say that. But a good triode sometimes will have less distortion than a bipolar junction transistor. And there are circuits you can use with tubes. Of course, they do with transistors too. They do things in op amps in particular to cancel out distortions. But you can put two tubes in a row. The second one is an inverter, and if the tubes are identical, their forward transfer curves will cancel out, and you'll get a fraction of the distortion. Why, you can't remove distortion by having another device. And I've actually done that for people. We took this circuit, and here's the distortion, and here it shows on the scope, and here's another one just like it, and we invert the signal in between, and that stuff's all gone. And it sounds cleaner too.
Well, then just going back to that, if you can measure it and you can design it, but in the end, you have to listen to it.
Well, of course.
To approve it.
Of course.
That's
like I
what
said,
we're saying.
I said earlier when you and I were talking, I don't know if I got it on your recording, but the test bench and the design work is a starting point. And then most of the work is the artwork of getting it to sound musical, because there's all this energy running around in these circuits that are doing things outside of the circuit. You know, dielectrics have energy in them, and that energy goes out there and it comes back into it. Whether it's electrostatic or magnetic, magnetic fields collapse back around coils when you interrupt the power to them. So there's all kinds of things that happen. So most of the work in making good audio is not just getting out an electronic cookbook and putting an op-amp circuit together.
Oh, you said the bad word, op-amps.
Yeah, well, they're not necessarily bad.
Do you use op-amps?
In some of my projects, you heard, well, the DAC has them.
Yeah.
And a good op-amp, not necessarily the best measuring ones, and not necessarily the highest gain ones, if you can use a little less feedback, but how you interface them, the impedance of the output, and how it interfaces with the cable, because there's reflections in cables.
So it's only the implementation, basically.
Yeah,
You can
well,
make anything sound good if you know how to use it.
yeah, I mean, you use a time domain reflectometer, you'll find out there's reflections in cables, and
You
here's.
There are differences in cables?
Yeah, well, the signal comes back to the op amp or the power amp, and it's late, and it gets into the feedback, and it's trying to make a correction of something that already happened. You know, supposedly this is the speed of light, but it's a little bit less, but it's still too late to be accurate. And so we hear stuff like that. We lose a sound stage. And
Well, they say that the human hearing is more sensitive to time errors than to pitch.
oh my God, well, pitch, I recognize your voice because of pitch. You know, and you know, throughout history, evolution, you know, sounds are what protected us in many cases.
It's a survival. We don't have ears so we can listen to music. We have ears as a survival device. Yeah.
Imagine sitting out in our backyard when it's not raining, maybe early in the morning, closing your eyes, and you can identify where all the birds are in the trees. Now imagine the processing power that we have in our hearing, it's astounding. Our vision too, but I mean our hearing is just amazing. And I've trained my brain and my ear to hear these sounds of resistors and types and stuff, and I don't like most of those sounds, but I recognize them. Mm. And it's just from practice, you know. I don't think I have any special skills there or advantage, other than I've just done a lot of it, you know. It's like a concert pianist. They practice a lot. Yeah. You know, you think, wow, how do they do that? You know, I can't play the piano like that. Well, if you played as much as they did.
Repetition.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to be able to have the sensibility to identify, you know, things that can be improved.
Yeah, yeah, and you get to where you recognize things that are right and things that are not right. And so you try to fix the things that aren't right without wrecking the things that are right, which is a trick in itself. And it just takes a lot of doing to get there. It's, you know, there's no simple overnight answers to any of it. Getting back to op amps for a second, though, I don't know if I finished there. Power supply is a big deal, just like it is with the tubes. I spent a lot of time working on power supplies, that final regulation before you get to the actual circuits. That has to be so pure. Otherwise, the power supply is just going to add its own character. And a lot of tube circuits are, you know, traditionally they have electrolytic caps feeding the circuits, and they're going to give you a little bit of something going on there too. And there's a lot of break-in with those too. So, and we all have to use them because that's the best way to store energy. But you have to add some high-performance regulators in there to really nail down that power supply so it isn't doing things to the music.
Well, some hi-fi manufacturers always give you the option of adding an extra power supply to the products, and maybe there's something behind that.
I keep it inside the box because when you put it in another box, you've got the impedances of that umbilical cable. And so you're losing a lot of the advantage of having that power supply close to the audio circuitry. Now, of course it's going to add noise and stuff. It doesn't have to.
But in the phono stage, don't you think that's a dangerous place to put an internal power supply?
No, because if you know what you're doing, I've actually got ways in there to nullify hum and noise from the power supply so that you don't hear it. Before you leave, if the power ever comes back on, we're going to go down there and we're going to cue up a record but not drop the needle, and I'm going to turn the volume up to 100.
Because I have a history of issues with hum in my phono stages. I'm still looking for the optimal phono stage.
We'll turn the volume up to 100. Something. We'll turn the volume up to 100 to the point where you could use that cartridge as a microphone. And
you have a lot of stuff put up in that room. You should be getting some hum.
You won't have any hum. You won't, and I won't ship them if there's any hum. And I'll go in there and tweak it so there's no hum. And if I can't do it, which is about 1 out of 20 to 25 phono stages, I replace the power transformer because the windings, these are toroids, and if they don't have the windings in exact multiples of 360 degrees, I kind of envision the electric and magnetic field sort of like the corona around the sun where you've got one of these bursts out of here. Well, those transformers can do that if the windings aren't done just right. So there are some transformers, I've got a box of them down there that are rejects that just weren't good enough. I mean, most people wouldn't notice it, but I don't want to ship it like that. You know, if somebody says they have hum, I know they got some other kind of problem because I don't ship them like that. And I'm kind of I don't know what the word is. paranoid about that kind of stuff. I just want it to
So
be
am
perfect.
I get a lot of homes sometimes
Yeah, well,
in the past.
it's it's electric and magnetic fields. It's the physics and the engineering math, Maxwell's equations. There's a guy named Faraday that
That's right.
discovered a lot of this stuff, and it's amazing. Guy having a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
he had a lot of trouble getting people to agree with him back then as to what he was doing.
Well,
but
you have to build now these
he's-
Faraday cages for the phone.
well, there's that. But he noticed that magnetic fields, when you start a current going through there, a wire, you get a field. And Maxwell gave us all the equations. Although there's another guy, and I can't think of the name right now, that did a lot of the work. But Maxwell got all the credit.
Well, the step-up transformers are notorious for that. You have to orient them. You have to play with the orientation, to eliminate home or to.
Yeah, I don't use step-up transformers.
What-
My engineering tells me that there's hysteresis and all kinds of other problems with transformers. And if you build a transformer that's really good at low frequency, it's not as good at high frequency. And so there's the trade-offs are crazy.
So you use active.
Active.
Equalization
I use FETs.
for the moving coil amplification.
I use FETs for moving coil. The equalization is all passive. I
No
use
feedback.
no feedback. No. And that's why I have to make that. I set that up very accurately, and I tell people what kind of tubes to use to get the most accurate response. And if they wanted more gain, if they were going to go to 12AX7s, let's use those. Have more Miller effect capacitance, which is the capacitance between the grid and the plate. And the more gain you have, the stronger that becomes. But some of the tubes have short plates and some have long plates. So the short plate ones have less capacitance generally, and the RIAA will still be pretty accurate, even though you go to more gain by switching out the tubes. So it's kind of a complicated thing, but I try to give people some rules of thumb that they can use if they want more gain. 412AX7s is 69 decibels a gain, which is a lot. So it's
Yeah.
more than you're generally going to need. The important thing is to find a good quiet set of tubes, and as I mentioned to you before, it all depends on how well the vacuum is drawn on the tubes when they're made, and you can't tell when you look at a tube. How good's the vacuum? So some tubes are going to get noisier or be noisier than others, and it doesn't matter if they're NOS or recently made. I have buckets full of reject tubes down there. That's why I don't like to sell tubes, because I end up paying almost to what the tube people do that sell them, and by the time I reject them, I'm losing money. So I've put a tubes page on the website where people can buy tubes, and then it makes it easier for me. So.
Well, let's see if we can get back to. Do we have electricity yet?
No, this light will come on if we get it.
Oh.
But the way that power went off, we got one reclose and it didn't make it. And so lightning did some serious damage to some part of the power distribution.
We got 4 inches of rain.
We did? Did you check it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And that was what, in an hour?
Yeah.
Oh, do we have water in the basement?
Well, it sounds like
Better take a boat down there, huh?
Sounds like we have other things to do. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. This was fun. I wish we had more time to listen, but I guess we got plenty of time to talk just being out here, so that
There'll be
worked
another
out.
time, and when you're in New York, we'll hit you with some tickets for the match.
Oh, I'd love that.
We have to go.
Yeah. Oh, we do.
Special for that.
We do. All right.
All right.